Good morning, everyone. It's a pity I can't see the audience, but anyway. I was given a very simple title, actually, to open this session. Why is PGTA, as we now call it, important? And I'm going to try and keep it simple. This remains, after all these years, still highly controversial, and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of words have been written by this, and I take a very simple view and have all the way through that we simply should not be transferring genetically abnormal embryos following IVF. I thought I would start the talk really by drawing your attention to this recent paper, which is the Japanese registry data from 2015 of some 250,000 cycles. So it's a wonderful resource if you're looking at outcome data, particularly for single embryo transfer, because in Japan, the majority of transfers are single embryo. And so if you look year by year, this is basically where we stand in 2015, nearly 40 years since the birth of the first baby following IVF. And what you can see here are the familiar age-related curves, pregnancy per embryo transfer, pregnancy per registered cycle, coming down as you reach in women of 40 years and over. Live birth per registered cycle is even lower and starts somewhere in the early 20% level and comes down, of course, precipitously as women age. And this line is the miscarriage line. And notice that, in fact, this is the percentage, this is the rate of miscarriage expressed as a percentage, and this is different from the percentage on this side. So this is 100% here by the time you get to 48. So there are obviously very few cases of IVF done at these advanced stages. So really the story here is the enormous amount of wasted effort and negative outcomes. There's a huge amount of effort goes in to really a relatively small percentage of live births. And so there is a need to improve the efficiency of IVF, I would argue. Okay, so why is it important? So the first point is that it's well established, and indeed it's true of natural conception. Chromosomal aneuploidy is common in human gametes and pre-implantation embryos, and this has been shown by multiple techniques and in various ways over decades. And we now understand that it's a major cause of developmental arrest, as we saw in the previous presentation, IVF failure, miscarriage, and rarely affected live births. So the incidence of aneuploidy at birth in the natural population is 0.3%. So transferring an aneuploid embryo is not going to give rise to a live birth outcome. So, as far as I'm concerned, there's no clinical or ethical justification for transferring these aneuploid embryos following IVF. And in the past, I've asked clinicians in the audience like this to say whether or not they would transfer an aneuploid embryo. And generally speaking, with very few exceptions, no one would knowingly transfer an aneuploid embryo. The other point I would make is that aneuploidy testing, or PGTA, is actually the most effective embryo selection method so far reported. So for the first 40 years of IVF, we've constantly been looking for improved embryo selection methods. And as far as I'm concerned, my reading of the literature is that it is the most effective selection method so far described. So if you want to do embryo selection following IVF, that's a simple answer to that issue. The other aspect of this is that there are, of course, differences between eggs and embryos in their general viability. So it's not all about genetics. It is about embryo quality, of course, particularly oocyte quality and secondarily embryo quality. But if an embryo is genetically imbalanced, that trumps, to use an unpopular word at the moment, that trumps everything else because it will cause failure downstream of all other viability factors. So you can get implantation, but if you have a genetic imbalance, then that will prevent development through to live birth. But now we come to the difficult part, because if we're going to apply this globally or routinely for application, our testing should be preferably non-invasive or minimally invasive. It should be accurate, and it should also be inexpensive and straightforward to interpret. So there are two important things here that are counterbalanced. On the one hand, I think it's arguable that we should do it globally and routinely. But on the other hand, we're not quite there yet, and I'll leave it to subsequent speakers in this session, actually, to go into much more detail on the technology. But I'm just going to, again, introduce different approaches to PGTA briefly, and then go on and talk about our own clinical experience. It's a very small data set, and Bob Anderson is then going to follow up. Bob Anderson's program actually was the inspiration of our program, which is an all single embryo transfer program. Okay, so the origins and types of aneuploidy. This is where it gets tricky. So there are basically various ways in which aneuploidies are introduced into the embryo. Firstly, we have meiotic aneuploidies, primarily in the oocyte, due to errors in meiosis, but also from the sperm during male meiosis, but there are tenfold more meiotic aneuploidies on the maternal side. We also get aneuploidies generated through abnormal fertilization. So we have haploids, digynic and diandric triploids, and so on. And that's why we all check for the number of pronuclei following IVF, because Bob Edwards, who really promoted that idea very early on, was understood the fact that triploides are the most common cause of miscarriage. But there are also these mitotic aneuploidies, and of course, if they arise following fertilization, then instead of affecting the whole embryo, then they're going to affect only part of it. There's a lot of talk about rescue or a so-called self-correction. This is a rare event. It does occur, but it's a rare event, and it has its risks because you risk uniparental disomy or the unmasking of a mutation carried an severe autosomal recessive that's only carried by the parent whose chromosome is retained. So technologies for PGTA have evolved. We started out by trying to do karyotyping. This turns out to be very difficult in eggs and embryos. The chromosomes are very compact, and it's very difficult to band the chromosomes. This quickly moved on to fluorescent in situ hybridization, but we're limited in the numbers of fluorochromes, and so we were limited in the numbers of chromosomes that we could analyze simultaneously. But then you come on to copy number analysis, which is really quantitative. And Nathan Treff was the pioneer of the use of quantitative fluorescent PCR for this, and used it very effectively. And now we're on to low read depth. So this is a quantitation of how much DNA do I have on that chromosome. And it has problems, of course, because you're amplifying DNA from single cells or small numbers of cells. And that quantitation may be more or less accurate. And there's a lot of arguments about which technologies are the most accurate, and Nathan is actually going to talk about the impact that that can have on the levels of mosaicism and whether all techniques are really picking it up correctly. You can do genotyping, and of course, if you have markers across all of the chromosomes, then actually you can do cytogenetics with SNP markers. And indeed, you can look at the intensity of those SNP markers, and particularly groups like Repromeda and Brno in the Czech Republic have pioneered this. You can actually get both this kind of analysis, copy number, quantitative analysis, as well as a genotype analysis, which in the case of trisomy is definitive, because you then have markers that tell you that you've inherited both parental chromosomes from one parent, indicating a trisomy, and also at the same time telling you the parental origin. So we're moving towards this kind of situation in which next generation sequencing is going to be used to combine genotyping and copy number analysis. And so the testing is getting more accurate, but it's not getting much cheaper. So that, I think, is very important for routine and global application. We are really going to have to work much harder to reduce the cost of all of this testing. Okay, so then to summarize how this works out, if you have a copy number test, then you get accurate, high-resolution copy number quantitation. It's moderately accurate at discriminating full and mosaic changes. You can only detect certain types of triploidy, but now because you can multiplex these tests, the cost is coming down. And the cost is relatively low, but still expensive. With genotyping, you get direct identification of meiotic trisomies and so on, and these other situations, and it's highly informative. It's, I think, I would say, moderately accurate at quantitation, but you can also do fingerprinting and detect contamination, but you need parental DNA to do the analysis, and the cost is currently significantly higher than this. So not many centers are using this for PGTA, although some centers in California through Natera are still using SNP-based approaches. Okay, so in the second half of the talk, I'm going to talk about our experience of incorporating PGTA into an IVF program that was designed to do single embryo transfer for all women of all ages. No one entering this program would have a double embryo transfer, and I know I don't have to remind this audience about the downside of multiple pregnancy. And so I really think that combining the various approaches that we have here give us the tools to eliminate or really substantially reduce multiple pregnancies. And I think all of us need now to begin to consider this policy of doing single embryo transfer. There are countries, of course, in Scandinavia that have mandated this for many years. And as I said in my introduction, Japan has moved to this quite some time ago for that reason. So just to quickly go through how this was set up. These are patients requiring IVF or ICSI. We put them through Blaster's culture in a time-lapse incubator in low oxygen, and then we offer them, so it's optional. Now, the data I'm going to show is 90% of the patients elect to have PGTA. So we created a financial package that includes the frozen embryo transfers and so on to facilitate this for patients and to reduce the cost of taking this kind of approach. And so the genetic testing does cost more, but we've tried as far as we can to reduce it within the package. But it nevertheless costs them £2,000 more per cycle to have the testing. So then, in all cases, then we take all of the blastocysts. This actually should, instead of freeze all, be freeze only. So we don't freeze all embryos, arrested embryos. We only freeze them if they reach the blastocyst stage. We do this by vitrification, and then we do single vitrified thawed blastocyst transfer in later managed cycles for all patients. The data I'm going to show is relatively small. We collected it over 2 years. It's a prospective cohort study of 155 patients and 222 cycles. So we have included every cycle. All failed cycles and so on have been incorporated into the calculations and the histograms that I'm going to show you to give you as close to a complete picture of the outcomes. The average age in our program was 39 years. So there was no AMH cutoff. As long as the patients were suitable for IVF, they could come through the 1-by-1 program. So 1-by-1 plus is with the testing, and 1-by-1 is without the testing. So, and this is about to be published in Human Fertility. So these are the results. And it really amazed us. I mean, we were encouraged by, you'll see a much larger series from Bob Anderson in the subsequent talk. We should possibly have considered switching around, because we really took inspiration from his approach. And so this is our results broken down. So overall, we had an 80% implantation rate. But remember what we're doing here. We're first of all selecting blastocysts, and we're also then transferring all embryos in a later managed cycle. So there is a lot of data to show that this approach can improve implantation and pregnancy rates. So it's not just the PGTA. There's a combination of things here. But this particular strategy in combination then gives you these results. This is the clinical pregnancy rate, stroke live delivery rate. Most of these have delivered now. So this is as close to, I think, if you like, live birth rate. But of course, this sounds very good. And as we've seen in previous talks, the implantation rate was variable. It's a small series. Here you can see this is only, I should have said at the beginning, of all the cycles, we'd only done 85 transfers at the point at which we analyzed. So this is very small numbers, really. So there's some variability, but essentially we get exceptionally high implantation rates. And what we argue is this is very important for clinical management. So, okay, so this is the implantation clinical pregnancy rate. The green line is our estimate at this time. It will take another year for us to get the cumulative pregnancy rates. This is as close as we can get to the cumulative pregnancy rates, and we can see we start up at just over 70% in women under 35, and then it actually comes down quite dramatically here until in the over 40s, although if we find a single euploid blastocyst, they have a very good chance. In fact, in most cases, we didn't find those, so that it's actually very ineffective once you get beyond 42. And then the final set of histogram bars are the live birth rate in 2016 following frozen embryo transfer in the UK. And this includes single embryo transfers, double embryo transfers, and so on. And you can see that we really are much better using this approach than the national average. So we find it very effective. Okay. So this then is a summary of that data, 85 transfers in 74 patients, and so on. The losses, we had 8% preclinical losses and only 6% clinical losses, so a very low miscarriage rate. And in fact, in addition to these that are reported here on this slide, we had two others. One was due to misreporting of the PGTA result, and they miscarried as a result a Turner syndrome, and that was simply misreporting of the PGTA. And in the other case, it was a triploidy which could not be detected by NGS. So for us, this, of course, is a message that if you put aneuploid embryos back, then you will have miscarriages and failures. But the other side of the coin is that we have all of these embryos frozen, so these are all banked. So of the pregnant delivered patients, they have 126 other frozen blastocysts in storage and can come back. So if these patients want twins, they can have twins 1 year apart, which is the healthy way of doing it. And so we think, and obviously a proportion of the patients that did not get pregnant, half of them have other frozen blastocysts which are euploid that have yet to be transferred. So we think this is really a very promising approach. And the other interesting thing about this is that we analyzed the aneuploidies that we found in all of these embryos. So we have, sorry, I can't accurately remember, I think it's over 600 blastocysts have been analyzed in this program so far. And when we broke it down by age, this is what you find. So the green part of the bar is euploid. The red is a single trisomy that can be viable. The orange are other viable trisomies, and this actually comes from the Japanese data, follow-up data. So the red and orange are potentially viable, would get through to pregnancy but cause miscarriage. The black part of the bar are so aneuploid that they're really unlikely to implant or develop. And what you see as you go to older stages is not so much that this increases, although they do, but the proportion of normals to viable aneuploidies increases. And this is why, in that original curve, we believe that there's such a high level of miscarriage. So if you put all that effort into getting a patient in their 40s pregnant, the likelihood is they'll miscarry unless you do PGTA. So, in summary then, why is PGTA important? It's a very efficient method for embryo selection, which facilitates single vitrified blastocyst transfer, so you can, with confidence, approach patients about using single blastocyst transfers. And it reduces the number of redundant cycles and transfers. Many of these patients we know would have had, because we looked at the quality of the embryos and the blastocysts that we would have transferred, and we can see that they would have had multiple failed transfers had we not done the testing. So it avoids the transfer of non-viable aneuploided embryos and reduces miscarriages rates, but unexpectedly, I think it improves clinical management so that if you have even 2 failed transfers in a younger patient, you now know that there might well be an endometrial receptivity problem or other issue and can investigate further. And it promotes improved clinical and embryology standards. So for those centers trying this approach, everything has to be optimized. You have to have optimal blastocyst culture, optimal vitrification, optimal transfers, and very close scrutiny of your PGTA results to get this kind of level of result, I believe. And I'd just like to end by crediting, I think, the last speaker, Christine Ottolini, who's pictured here, showed the same picture. This is the team at the Bridge Center that ran this 1x1 program, and sadly we've lost our genetic counselor who's gone back to Miami. Okay, thank you very much.